You're tuned into That's Life, where we celebrate the beauty, the chaos, and the wonder of real life. Sometimes it makes you laugh, sometimes it makes you cry, but it always makes you feel. Settle in. We're just getting started. Ellen slammed the last document shut, rubbing her temples tiredly. Her gaze slid to the clock face. Already 10, she exclaimed in surprise. Her hand reached for the phone, and of course, 3 missed calls from Paul were waiting there. Tapping her pen nervously on the table, she immediately dialed his number. Long rings hung in the air, and Ellen was about to hang up when his voice, sounding unusually cold, came through the receiver. Yes, darling, she said, hearing guilty, fawning notes in her voice. Forgive me. He sighed heavily. A pause hung in the air, but the call didn't disconnect, which was a good sign. I know I promised to leave early today, Ellen continued, but the project... Paul cut her off sharply. The project, of course, Ellen. His voice held weariness mixed with reproach. I understand work is the most important thing for you, only you're marrying me, not a project. Paul, our wedding is in a month, I remember. She tried to answer as gently as possible. All right, I'm waiting for you at home, he said dully, and hung up. I'll be there soon, love, Ellen whispered into the dead phone. Putting down the receiver, Ellen slowly exhaled, feeling the tension ease slightly. How could she have forgotten her promise to finish early? However, it was no surprise. Work had been her only passion for many years. That was until Paul appeared in her life 2 years ago. She smiled, looking at the elegant gold ring with a large diamond sparkling on her finger. The memory of the proposal surfaced. His nervousness as he got down on one knee, the melody of a street musician's violin, the applause of the restaurant patrons, and her own yes said through tears of joy. Only a year had passed, but during that time, her relationship with Paul had noticeably changed. He insisted that the reason for all their problems was her excessive workload. But Ellen had always worked a lot, even when they first met. True, she had been promoted a year ago, and the volume of work had indeed increased. Now she was managing a project on which, without exaggeration, the future of their company depended. Ellen simply couldn't let down her colleagues and management. Paul, it seemed, didn't understand this. When she finally got home, he was already asleep, his face buried in the pillow. Ellen gently stroked his hair. He snuffled softly, just like a small child, but didn't wake up. She sighed, sensing that another silent treatment awaited him tomorrow morning. In the mirror, she saw a tall, slender, dark-skinned girl with an impeccable black bob and huge dark eyes framed by thick lashes. Could such a woman possibly spend her entire life in an office, hunched over a computer? Ellen smiled at her reflection. The decision came instantly and irrevocably. This week, she would definitely take a day off. She would pamper herself, choose the most beautiful dress, do her hair and makeup, and in the evening, she will order a delicious dinner, a good wine, put on her favorite music, and wait for him to return from work. Then he would surely forgive her. Of course, she will have to promise again that she would work less, and perhaps when the project was finally completed, that would be the case, or at least she would start leaving the office on time. Ellen had been accustomed to hard work since early childhood. No one seeing her now driving a new foreign car, in a designer suit, expensive shoes, with a perfect hairstyle and manicure, would believe she had grown up in a remote village. Despite the nearest town being only an hour and a half away, their small homeland was a real backwater. Bad roads, dilapidated houses, pigs and cows roaming freely in the streets. That's how Ellen remembered her village. She was raised by her grandmother, although both her parents were alive and well. Her mother divorced her father when Ellen was only 4 years old, and she barely remembered him. Her first vivid memory was a long, tiring trip on an old, rattling bus with her mother, surrounded by many bags and suitcases. At her grandmother's house in the village, little Ellie was happy and free. She could play outside all day, run with the neighbor kids, and gorge on her grandmother's pies. But for some reason, her mother didn't like it there. And after a few months, she left for the city again. She said she needed to find a job and a place to live, and then she would immediately take Ellen. At first, her mother came every 2 weeks, then once a month, then once every 4 months. And then she came and announced that she had met a man in the city and was going to marry him. Ellen even remembered her mother bringing Uncle Leo to visit her and her grandmother. Ellie didn't like Uncle Leo. He tried too hard to seem nice, and his smile seemed unnatural. However, her mother looked happy next to him. After some time, her mother and Uncle Leo got married, but they were in no hurry to take Ellen in. "Why doesn't Mom come for me?" the girl asked her grandmother. She only sighed heavily. "Mom says their apartment is very small," she explained, immediately adding, "Are you unhappy living with me?" "No, Granny," Ellen replied. And so they lived together, just the two of them. Gradually, Ellen got used to this life. Her grandmother was incredibly kind, cheerful, and never despaired. No matter what happened, she always repeated to her granddaughter, "The main thing is that we are alive and well. And as long as your hands and feet are whole, your head works, everything in this life can be fixed." Her grandmother's name was Eleanor Constance. Her mother had named her daughter in her honor. In the village, they were distinguished as Old Eleanor and Little Ellen. This nickname stuck so much that Ellen was called that, even when she grew up. But no matter how hard her grandmother tried to stay cheerful, age took its toll. And little Ellen understood early on that Eleanor Constance needed her help. Of course, at first, her mother sent them a little money, but after getting married, she stopped. Her grandmother's pension was barely enough for two. What saved them was the garden, chickens, and a goat that Eleanor Constance kept. But little Ellen understood that this couldn't go on forever. It was up to her, little Ellen, to work to provide a decent life for herself and her grandmother in the future. From childhood, she began looking for opportunities for part-time work. Some village women went to the city to sell vegetables, fruits, eggs, and dairy products. Little Ellen wanted to too, but her grandmother strictly forbade it. "You're too small to go to the city alone," she said. "And trading at the market. What a horror. Don't worry, little one. We have enough money." Ellen heard her grandmother's words, but she saw how Eleanor Constance denied herself many things for her sake. Her grandmother hadn't bought new clothes in a long time, and her winter boots had been patched up by the neighbor, Uncle Johnny, for the fourth or fifth time. Well, if you won't let me go to the city, I'll find a way to earn money here, the granddaughter stubbornly declared. She did everything she could. She gathered berries and mushrooms, selling them to local resellers. Once a week, a man came to the village to buy medicinal herbs. Her grandmother showed Ellen where to find them, and the girl would go into the forest early in the morning, collecting as many herbs as she could carry in a sack. She also learned that the local shop accepted empty glass bottles. Many people in the village had accumulated such bottles, but no one wanted to wash them to turn them in. But little Ellen wasn't lazy. She went from house to house, collected all the bottles, and brought them to her grandmother's yard. This way, the villagers got rid of unnecessary junk, and little Ellen earned a little money. She also collected scrap metal with the neighbor boys. When she was accepted into their team, the leader, a shaggy, freckled Andy, explained the rules. If you want to come with us, fine. Everything you find is yours. But nobody cares that you're a girl. You have to carry your share of the metal. You carry what you can. Of course, she couldn't carry as much as the boys did, but she still earned a lot from it. The girl quickly realized that she should look for not the heaviest, but the most expensive metal, copper. She quickly learned to recognize it in old spare parts. When she and the boys explored the dump of abandoned cars, Ellen found copper and sold it. With this money, she bought clothes, shoes, and school supplies for herself. And she kept a close eye on her grandmother's wardrobe, making sure Eleanor Constance lacked nothing. "You're my little breadwinner," her grandmother would say, with tears in her eyes, every time her granddaughter handed her money. "When I grow up, Granny," little Ellen would reply, "I'll take you to the city. I'll buy us a big, big house, and we'll live there. You won't have to work in the garden or keep goats anymore." Eleanor Constance would just laugh in response. "I'm happy living here, my little one. But if you don't forget your old grandmother, I'll be very happy." At school, Ellen was an excellent student. Mathematics, physics, social studies, and geography came particularly easy to her. She was also a good student in other subjects, but she didn't consider them particularly useful for her future life. After the 11th grade, she entered the best university in the city to study economics. When her mother found out about it, she offered Ellen to live with them. "I'll be fine in the dormitory," Ellen replied, refusing. "And you're already cramped in the apartment with the little one." Her mother and her husband had a son, Stevie, 2 years ago. It seemed that after that, her mother had completely forgotten about Ellen. Of course, Ellen pretended that it didn't offend her at all. But sometimes, when her grandmother was already asleep, she would cry into her pillow at night, tormented by the question, what was it about her that made her mother love her less than her brother? At university, Ellen also studied diligently. Even though she started working from the first year and sent money to Eleanor Constance every month. "You'll see, grandmother," Ellen would say on the phone every time. "I'll finish university and get a job at the coolest company. That's when I'll move you to live with me and we'll have a good life." Her grandmother would only smile in response. "The main thing is that you are well, granddaughter," she invariably replied. Ellen had already passed all her exams with flying colors. received her honors diploma, and was about to go to the village when her mother called. "My darling Ellen," she cried into the phone, "your grandmother has died." They all went to the village together. Her mother, her husband, Ellen, and little Stevie. Ellen was so shocked by what had happened that the entire following week passed for her in a haze. Her mother and stepfather took care of the funeral arrangements, and Ellen looked after her little brother. She sat a lot on the floor in her familiar grandmother's house, watching Stevie play with his toys, and thought, what should she do now? After all, she had promised her grandmother to take her to the city, buy a huge house where they would live together. And now, what was the point of trying anymore? "Ellen, I need to talk to you," her mother said after the funeral. "Of course, Mom," Ellen replied, feeling empty. "We found your grandmother's will," her mother continued. "She wanted this house to go to you." Ellen shrugged indifferently. "It doesn't matter to me," she replied. "I won't live here anyway. Everything here reminds me of Grandma and my childhood." "Do as you think best," her mother sighed, not insisting. A week later, gathering the last of her strength, Ellen returned to the city. This was the life she had dreamed of since childhood. She got a job, and for all the following years, tirelessly worked her way up. At 28, she became the youngest managing director in a large company. Only her personal life was not working out at all. Although not working out isn't quite the right phrase. Ellen simply didn't let anyone close to her until she met Paul. Perhaps it was love at first sight, or perhaps it was simply time to experience strong feelings. But the mutual attraction was instantaneous. Paul was her complete opposite, always lighthearted, cheerful, and carefree. He seemed to balance the serious Ellen. He had his own fitness studio. He started as a simple trainer, then assembled and trained his own team, and opened his own business. Ellen immediately warned him about her heavy workload, to which Paul replied, "It's nothing. I love my work too. And if I finish earlier, I'll come home, cook you dinner, and faithfully wait for my beautiful girl." At first, that's how it was. But lately, Ellen had started to notice that Paul was getting increasingly irritated by her work. Their arguments were becoming more frequent. It was then that Ellen decided to surprise him. She had to act in such a way that her fiancé wouldn't suspect anything. So Ellen behaved as usual. After the argument with Paul, she tried to text and call him more often. And then one day, during another conversation, she casually asked, "What time are you finishing today?" "Why?" Paul asked, his guard up. "Nothing," Ellen replied immediately. "It's just that I'll be staying late again today. Sorry." It suddenly seemed to her that her fiancé breathed a sigh of relief. "I'll be back late today too," he said. "So it's okay." Ellen smiled into the phone. "Thanks for understanding." "Of course, darling." He hung up. "He's probably still upset," Ellen sighed. "Never mind. Today I'll melt his heart." Her new dress had just arrived. Thin, made of soft red fabric. It fit her figure perfectly. "In this dress, he'll definitely forgive me," Ellen thought contentedly, carefully putting it back in the box. All the employees were surprised when Ellen announced that she was leaving work early today. But out loud, of course, no one dared to ask the boss for the reasons. Ellen drove up to the house, parked in her usual spot, and was surprised to notice that her fiance's car was already there. He must have taken a taxi to work today, she thought. She was so excited that she didn't even wait for the elevator and ran up to the 5th floor. She opened the door with her key and froze on the threshold, stunned. Paul's sneakers were carelessly lying in the hallway, and next to them were some red women's sandals. No, a thought flashed through her mind. This only happens in bad comedies, not in real life. She took a deep breath and slowly exhaled, trying to calm down. Then she calmly placed the box with the dress on the floor, took off her shoes, and slowly entered the apartment. Almost immediately, her fiancé's voice came from the bedroom. Ellen slowly walked into the room. The first thing she saw was Paul's back. Of course, then she noticed the girl lying next to him. Well, Ellen said calmly, feeling everything inside her contract. So I wasn't imagining it when I heard the joy in your voice at the news that I would be coming home late today. Paul turned around sharply. There was such genuine fright in his eyes that Ellen almost found it funny. The young blonde girl shrieked loudly and hastily pulled the blanket over herself. "Ellen!" Paul exhaled in astonishment, as if he had seen a ghost. She expected any reaction. Ridiculous excuses, pleas for forgiveness, attempts to explain everything. But her fiancé managed to surprise her. He sighed sadly and said, "Well, perhaps it's for the best." Then he turned to the blonde girl, who was huddled under the blanket as if hoping to become invisible. "Jane, wait for me in the car, please. I'll be down in half an hour." Ellen watched in surprise as Jane fearfully crawled out from under the blanket, quickly got dressed, and hurried out into the hallway. A second later, the front door slammed shut. "Right," Ellen said, turning to Paul. "And what does all this mean?" Paul sat on the bed, rubbing his temples tiredly with his fingertips. "It means I'm tired," he said dully. "And I've been thinking for a long time that we should break up." Ellen walked up to him and sat down next to him. "But why?" she asked, feeling completely bewildered. "I thought we just had a few small problems." Her fiancé shook his head. "The problem is much deeper. We are just too different. It's not even that you work a lot. It's that work is much more important to you than I am, and it always has been." He looked at her with a kind of sad resignation. "And I can't live like that. I'm built differently. I'm not an achiever. I like to work, but I'm not ready to live in my gym the way you live in the office. I want to enjoy life, and you don't know how to do that." "Well, perhaps you're right. It will be better for both of us." "I'm sorry," Paul said. He stood up, took a suitcase from the mezzanine, and began packing his things. Ellen went to the kitchen. That's where she sat until she heard the front door slam shut. "Okay," Ellen told herself, trying to pull herself together. "At least I have my job. I'm about to finish the project. After that, I'll take a vacation and start a new life." Only everything turned out completely differently than she had planned. A week later, when she came to work, she found that her office was being searched. Ellen Victoria, an unfamiliar man in a strict black suit, addressed her. "Yes?" she replied in surprise. "What's going on?" He ignored her question. "Please come with me to your office. I need to take your statement." It turned out that the management of her firm was suspected of major financial fraud. From that day on, work in their office was completely frozen, and the accounts and property of the leading employees were seized. Wait, Ellen said, feeling the ground disappear from under her feet. Does that mean my property is also seized? Yes, the man confirmed coldly. Your car, apartment, and all bank accounts. And for how long? Until all the circumstances are clarified, he replied, showing not the slightest sympathy. But I had no idea. And what should I do? She blurted out. Stay with friends or relatives, he advised, as if it were the simplest solution. Ellen signed some papers, feeling stunned, and went home. She was only allowed to take the most necessary things before she had to leave the apartment indefinitely. On the way, she, of course, called her lawyer, but he couldn't say anything encouraging. The accusations are very serious, he said, his voice sounding anxious. And investigations into such cases take a long time. Months, sometimes even years. And so, all this time, my property will be under arrest? He sighed heavily. I'm afraid so, Ellen Victoria. The only place she could go was the old grandmother's house in the village. After her grandmother's death, Ellen had never been back there. At first glance, the house had barely changed, except that it had become even more dilapidated. Ellen took the old rusted key from her bag. Hello, grandmother, she whispered softly. As a child, the house had seemed much bigger to her. Now everything looked so small and old, but at the same time, painfully familiar. Ellen walked through the room and sat on the bed she had once slept on. What should I do now, Granny? She asked the empty room, feeling completely lost. I thought I had everything in my life. It turns out you can lose it all in an instant. A fiancé, love, a career, money, an apartment. And what do I have left after that? Only your little house, which I completely forgot about. And then, for the first time in many years, she cried bitterly and inconsolably. Ellen woke up in the morning, roused by the bright sunlight. She hadn't even noticed falling asleep and had completely forgotten to draw the curtains. Well, she sighed, feeling broken. For so many years I woke up without an alarm, and yesterday I even forgot to set it. Although, on the other hand, what's the point of an alarm now? I don't even have a job. At that moment, her stomach rumbled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten anything since yesterday's lunch. It was clear there was nothing edible in her grandmother's house, so she had to go to the shop anyway. However, it was still very early. Ellen decided to spend this time cleaning. As she tidied up, sweeping away years of accumulated dust, she found herself distracted from her gloomy thoughts. Perhaps if this really drags on for a long time, I'll have to find a job here, Ellen reasoned aloud. Maybe I'll even start a farm, chickens or geese, or maybe even a cow. After cleaning, she felt even hungrier, and Ellen, relieved to see that it was time, headed to the shop. She walked through the village and noted with surprise that it seemed better here than in her childhood. Many new houses had appeared, and the old ones had been renovated and painted. The shop, which had stood in the same place for as long as she could remember, now gleamed with a new sign. And the sign isn't printed, Ellen thought. It's painted. And the artist is talented. I wonder if it's someone local. She went inside and was surprised again how clean and cozy it was, and the range of goods was also pleasing. The shop assistant, a young, pretty girl, saw Ellen and immediately smiled warmly and approached her. Good morning, she said. You're our first customer today. Ellen smiled back. Good morning to you too, she replied. It's nice to hear that. Have you come to stay for the summer? The girl asked, looking at Ellen. I don't know yet, she replied. And you guessed quickly that I'm not local? Well, there aren't many residents here. I know everyone by face, the shop assistant laughed. Right, I didn't think of that. Ellen smiled too. I lived here until I was 17, then I moved to the city. She looked thoughtfully at the shop assistant. It's strange. You're younger than me, but not by much. In theory, I should remember you. The girl smiled. No, I only moved here a year ago with my older brother. Oh, really? Ellen said in surprise. To live? Yeah. I didn't think anyone would willingly want to move to such a backwater. Alice seemed a little offended. You shouldn't say that, she said. It's very nice here. Relatively close to the city, but with beautiful nature and clean air. Actually, it was my brother who wanted to come here. He's an artist. Oh, really? Ellen exclaimed. So he painted the sign? Yes. It's very beautiful. Thank you. I'll be sure to tell him, Alice smiled. But I've talked your ear off. And you came to shop, not to learn my family history. It was very interesting, Ellen replied. By the way, my name is Ellen. Very nice to meet you. Alice? The shop assistant extended her small, firm hand decisively, which Ellen gladly shook. After that, she dictated everything she wanted to buy. Alice quickly brought what was needed and advised her on what was best to take. In the end, the girls were pleased with their acquaintance. Where do you live? Alice asked, packing the groceries. The second to last house on the edge of the village, Ellen said, on the side where the lake is. That's great, Alice exclaimed, happily. My brother and I live in the last house. I'll definitely introduce you sometime. Okay, Ellen replied. I'd be happy to. The weather was beautiful, and Ellen decided to eat outside. She didn't feel like cooking, so she simply made a few sandwiches with cheese and sausage on delicious fresh bread, brewed some fragrant tea, and went out onto the porch. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and Ellen sat, ate, and enjoyed the beautiful summer day. She suddenly thought with surprise that she couldn't remember the last time she had just sat like this, without work, without plans for the future, without thinking about how many things needed to be done today. Suddenly, a meow sounded near her feet. Ellen turned her head and saw a fat, striped cat that had silently climbed onto the porch and was looking at her with interest, or rather, at the plate of sandwiches. Judging by your appearance, you're not suffering from hunger, Ellen remarked, smiling. The cat looked at her attentively and repeated, meow, insistently. All right, you little extortionist here. She took out a piece of sausage and gave it to the cat. He sniffed it with interest, took it carefully, placed it on the porch, and began to eat. Enjoy your meal, Ellen said, and closed her eyes, deciding to continue basking in the sun. But a few seconds later, her peace was disturbed again. Sandro! A male voice called out somewhere nearby. Sandro, where are you? Did you run off to the neighbor's house again? Ellen looked at the cat, but he, even if he heard the exclamation addressed to him, didn't react at all. It seems they're calling you, Ellen remarked. Sandro, are you here? The gate swung open, and she saw a handsome blue-eyed man with slightly wavy light brown hair and a small reddish beard. It seemed he hadn't expected to see anyone here except the cat, so he was very embarrassed. Excuse me, please, he said, smiling awkwardly. My cat is behind me. He keeps running off to this house, so sometimes I come in to catch him. But honestly, besides the cat, I haven't touched anything here. Ellen smiled. It's all right. You have a very sweet cat. She looked at Sandro, who, having finished the sausage, began washing himself as if nothing had happened. He's already begged for food from you too, the cat's owner said disappointedly. It's impossible to refuse him, Ellen replied. And you must be the artist? Alice's brother? That's right, he said in surprise. I don't think I've earned that title yet. At least not if you meant it in a good way. But yes, I am indeed Alice's brother. Arthur. He extended his hand, as strong as his sister's, only much larger. Ellen, the girl said, shaking his hand. Very nice to meet you. If I had known someone lived here, I wouldn't have intruded so unceremoniously, he said. I only arrived yesterday, Ellen replied. So you couldn't have known about me. And I met your sister just a couple of hours ago when I went to the shop. Well, then it's clear, Arthur said. Are you staying long? I don't know yet, Ellen replied. But most likely, yes. Arthur picked up the cat, who meowed discontentedly, but feeling his owner's hand, didn't resist. Come visit us anytime, Arthur said. I'm often home unless I go out somewhere, and my sister works until 6, and then she'll come home too. Okay, Ellen replied. I'll definitely stop by sometime. Just give me a couple of days to settle in and tidy things up here. Of course, Arthur replied. If you need my help, just ask. The doors of our house are always open, literally. The neighbor and the cat left, and Ellen reached for her phone. She was waiting for a call. The lawyer calling to say there was some good news about their firm's case, or Paul. Thinking of him, Ellen immediately cursed inwardly. Things to do. I'll go do something useful. Until evening, Ellen tidied the house. She washed the windows until they sparkled, brushed away the remaining cobwebs from the walls and ceiling, vacuumed the furniture and the huge, heavy rug that covered the entire room. For as long as she could remember, it had always been there. It seemed her grandmother had never taken it outside and cleaned it right there. It must have been made of some very high-quality material, because after so many years, it was still as dense, only the colors have faded a little. At first, Ellen wanted to take it out, but she grabbed a corner and realized how heavy it was. Let it stay here, she decided. Grandma never moved it for a reason. She spent the first couple of days cleaning, and there was no time to think about anything else. But now that her grandmother's house was finally in order, visiting the neighbors wasn't such a bad idea. Alice is a very sweet, lively girl, Ellen thought. Besides, we'll get along as she clearly has a business streak. And her brother is probably just a sweet eccentric. Well, you can talk to people like that sometimes. Out of curiosity, she resolutely stood up, left the house, hung the same rusted lock on the door, and went to the neighbors. She immediately noticed how different their house was. Ellen no longer remembered who had lived there in her childhood, but it must have been a simple village house. Now it was renovated, plastered, and painted a delicate salmon color. Beautiful, Ellen thought, and very unusual. She walked up to the gate and pushed it. It wasn't locked. An old SUV stood in the courtyard. Surely Alice used it to go to the city for good for her shop. And there were flowers growing in the yard, the most ordinary wildflowers. This seemed strange because they were often considered weeds and pulled out, and then flower beds were made and planted with cultivated flowers. Arthur! Ellen called out, entering the yard. Alice! Meow, came the reply. Sandra was sitting on the porch, squinting in the sun. "Hello, friend," Ellen greeted him. "Where's your owner?" "I'm here." A voice sounded unexpectedly close, making her jump. Ellen hadn't even noticed she was standing near the open window from which Arthur had answered her. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you," he said, appearing in the doorway. I just got bored at home," Ellen began awkwardly. "So I remembered your invitation to visit." Arthur smiled. "I'm very glad. Otherwise, my sister was upset that you weren't coming over and wanted to stop by your place this evening." He squinted cunningly and looked at her. "If you're not too busy right now, we can go for a walk. I was just looking for a new spot for my painting." Ellen shrugged. She didn't really like useless walks, but there was nothing else to do anyway. "Okay," she replied. "Then I'm coming," Arthur said, and disappeared into the house. A few minutes later, he reappeared with a huge backpack on his shoulders. "I'm ready," he replied. "Let's go." "Shouldn't you close the door?" Ellen reminded him, pointing to the open door. "And the windows. What if someone gets into the house?" He shrugged. "Everyone seems pretty decent around here, but if someone decides to do that, well, that will be on their conscience." What a philosophy, Ellen thought, but didn't say anything aloud. They went out the gate, and Arthur confidently led her along the path. At first, Ellen thought they would go to the small lake, which was located at the end of the village. In her childhood, she had often swum there with other children, but they walked along the shore without even stopping. "Tell me about yourself," Arthur suddenly asked, looking directly at her. "You're so mysterious." Ellen smiled. "I don't know why you think that. This house was empty, but now I needed a place to live, so I moved here, that's all." "Well, it's up to you," he said, not insisting. "I won't pry. It's just that you're clearly not the kind of person who would come here willingly." "Well, then I can say that you and your sister are no less mysterious figures," Ellen retorted. He laughed. "That's true. Do you think we should stop here?" "I think it's a good spot." While talking, Ellen hadn't even noticed them reaching a small hill that offered a beautiful view of the lake. "Beautiful," Ellen admitted, amazed. "I lived here for so many years, but I've never seen it from this angle." Arthur took a blanket from his backpack, which he spread on the grass and sat on. The artist himself took out his easel, canvas, paints, and brushes. The day was warm, but not yet very hot, and she enjoyed this unexpected outing into nature. "If I talk to you, will it bother you a lot?" she asked, watching his preparations. Arthur shook his head negatively. "Not at all. My hands do the painting, and my head can think about whatever it wants. And talking to such a smart, interesting girl will be doubly pleasant." Ellen smiled. "Okay. Will you be offended if I ask something personal?" He shrugged. "Generally, I don't think I'm easily offended, but you can try." "Your work, it's not very profitable, is it?" Ellen asked, feeling a little awkward, "especially in the village." "True," he replied calmly, "but it's enough for me to live on. And the most important thing is that I'm doing what I love." "Just like your sister," Ellen remarked. "She has a great shop. It seems she knows how to run a business." Arthur smiled. "I knew from the first glance that you and Alice are very similar." Ellen decided to be honest. "Yes, I appreciate it when people have a passion they are willing to give themselves to completely and get the maximum result." "In monetary terms?" Arthur clarified with a smile, looking at her. "Are you against money?" "No. It's just that different people need different amounts of it, and many don't know how to earn it, and comfort themselves by saying that money isn't the most important thing in life. She immediately stopped herself, thinking that Arthur probably thought exactly that. But the artist didn't seem offended. He just smiled. "Well, I really do think that," he said, returning to his easel. "Of course, I'm not an ascetic, and I don't want to live in a hut and eat roots and raw fish. But the life I'm living now suits me perfectly, and I feel happy." "Well, I'm happy for you," Ellen replied, feeling a slight irritation. "But I'm not happy with my life. Not now. I lived in a huge apartment, drove a luxurious car, and had several hundred people under my command. And I was absolutely happy. And now I've lost all of that. And I don't know when I'll be able to get it back. And I'm completely unhappy with that." The artist turned and looked at her attentively. "Strange," he said thoughtfully. "When I first saw you, feeding the cat sausage, you looked completely happy. It was just a moment. But life is made up of moments." Ellen couldn't think of an answer to that. So she just looked at the lake and remembered how she used to go swimming there with the kids in her childhood and wouldn't get out of the water until her lips turned blue. Then she would run home to her grandmother, who would rub her dry with a towel and take her to the bathhouse. It was so hot in there that it felt like the warmth penetrated to her very bones. And how good it was after the bathhouse to sit at the table, wrapped in a towel, and watch her grandmother fuss around her, pouring milk tea, pushing pies closer. But even later, in the city, she remembered her apartment, huge, expensive, in the very center of the city, in a newly built ultra-modern complex. The best designer had done the renovation there. Only Ellen was hardly ever in that apartment because she was at work all the time. Yes, her expensive car. She drove it to work for 10 minutes in the morning because when she woke up, there were no traffic jams yet, and 10 minutes in the evening because there were no traffic jams anymore. And did work really make her happy or not? Or was it just the only place where she felt truly important and needed, where she was appreciated, praised, and told she was the best? And to not lose that, Ellen was ready to spend her whole life there. "I don't even have any friends," she suddenly thought sadly. She had friends at university, and for the first 6 months after graduation, she kept in touch with them. Then every time they suggested meeting, Ellen refused because she was either working or had to go to work the next day. Eventually, they just stopped inviting her. As for making friends at work, everyone there was either her subordinate or a competitor. It was even strange that she managed to start dating Paul at all. Lost in such thoughts, Ellen didn't even notice how much time had passed. She only came to when Arthur spoke to her again. "I think that's enough for today," he said, putting down his brushes. "Can I see?" Ellen asked, feeling curious. "Of course," he replied, and stepped aside. She was able to see the painting and was very surprised. Ellen had expected to see just a landscape. It was a complete surprise to see herself there. Yes, there was the lake and the forest, but somewhere far away and blurred in the background. Most of the canvas was occupied by Ellen herself. And although her face was almost invisible, the pose itself, her head lowered onto her crossed arms, he had captured her inner state. Yes, you can really see the despair I'm in here, Ellen thought sadly. How had he managed to convey everything so accurately? "Didn't you like it?" Arthur asked anxiously, noticing her silence. Ellen forced herself to smile. It's unexpected, she said honestly. I didn't even notice you were painting me all this time. Arthur smiled. Honestly, I didn't plan to. But I just looked at you once and realized I wouldn't rest until I captured this state of yours today. Ellen chuckled awkwardly. You definitely have talent. Thank you, he replied. Sorry if I embarrassed you. It's hard to embarrass me, Ellen retorted. He smiled. My sister should be back from work soon. I suggest we go back and make dinner. Are you not tired of me yet today? On the contrary, it's interesting, Ellen replied. In the time Alice and I have lived here, I've managed to study all the villagers, and I really wanted something new. And then you showed up. Oh, really? Arthur said, looking at her with interest. So I'm just another new subject for you? He laughed. Not only, I was curious before to imagine what you were really like, but I didn't expect to see you in person. Seeing Ellen's puzzled look, the artist explained, Your neighbor, Uncle Johnny, told me a lot about you. Ellen chuckled. Oh, really? And what did he say? That people like you are born very rarely, Arthur said seriously. That from childhood, you were special, bright like the sun, and strong like the wind. That you never doubted your abilities, and there was no task that was beyond you. Well, that's not quite true now, Ellen remarked, feeling bitterness. Not at all, Arthur objected. That's exactly how you look. She smiled sadly. Look at your painting. Clearly not. Arthur sighed. I understand that something serious has happened in your life, but I think you didn't return here by chance. Ellen laughed. So you're not just a non-materialist, a romantic, and an altruist, but also a mystic? Arthur laughed. Too much for you? Yes, Ellen replied, still smiling. But you're right. Here I feel like I'm truly regaining my strength, and I'm very happy about that. The cat was waiting for them on the porch. Sandro? Ellen suddenly said, looking at him. Is that in honor of Sandro Botticelli? Yes, Arthur replied, a little embarrassed. It's a bit cliché. Well, Ellen shrugged. The cat meowed expressively, and his owner frowned. I was hoping that life in nature would teach him to find his own food. He does find food, Ellen defended the cat, in his own way. Arthur's house was cool and cozy. All the walls, as she expected, were covered with paintings. You really are very talented, Ellen said, looking at them with admiration. Thank you, he replied. Will you help me with dinner? Of course, Ellen agreed. By the time Alice returned from work, everything was ready. Wow, Alice exclaimed, seeing Ellen. I was just planning to stop by your place this evening. They hugged, and Ellen felt an inexplicable fondness for this girl she had only met for the second time in her life. And I've been bothering your, as it turns out, very talented brother all day, Ellen said. Alice laughed. Yes, he's almost a genius. All right, that's enough, Arthur grumbled, smiling. Let's eat. At dinner, Ellen decided to talk about Arthur's paintings again. What I saw today is simply amazing, she said, addressing Alice, hoping to find an ally in her. And it's a crime that Arthur's paintings are just hanging in your village house, and no one sees them. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed the artist frown, but she continued anyway. I can look among my acquaintances for someone who can help you organize an exhibition. I'm sure Arthur is destined for great success and fame. To her surprise, Alice smiled and shook her head negatively. "Thank you for the offer," she replied, "but we don't need that." "What?" Ellen thought she had misheard. "Okay, Arthur, but you, Alice, the first time we met, I thought you were exactly like me. You have a business sense, and we don't need fame, attention, or success." Arthur suddenly interrupted her, his voice firm. "We had our reasons for coming here. I don't want any big exhibitions. I just want to live here quietly and peacefully." Ellen looked at his sister, and for a few seconds, it seemed to her that tears glistened in Alice's eyes. "What's going on?" Ellen wondered. "I just wanted to help them." "Okay," she said aloud, feeling awkward. "I've butted into something that's none of my business. I see you have some personal reasons." She cautiously got up from the table and stroked Sandro's back, who had settled on a neighboring chair. "And anyway, I've overstayed my welcome today. It was a good day. It was nice to meet you. Goodbye." Neither the brother nor the sister said a word watching her leave. And only when Ellen had already left their gate, a breathless Alice suddenly caught up with her. "Ellen, wait!" she called out. Ellen looked back. Judging by the girl's slightly red eyes, she was indeed on the verge of tears. "Forgive us," Alice suddenly said. "Honestly, I really want to be friends with you. And my brother liked you too, which is rare. He tries not to let people get close to him, and there are reasons for that. Anyway, we really want to be friends with you," Alice continued, speaking quickly, disjointedly. "And about the gallery. It was a wonderful offer, if it had happened under different circumstances. It's a pity I can't tell you everything." She suddenly grabbed Ellen's fingers with her small, strong hands and squeezed them tightly. "Just please believe me that there are reasons why we came here and are trying to lead this quiet, peaceful life, and promise not to be offended by us." "Okay," Ellen replied, sensing that something serious lay behind the secret. "I won't." The days passed quite calmly, filled with anticipation. Ellen called her lawyer, tried to contact someone from the firm's management, and find out how things were going. But there was no news. "The inspection is ongoing," they invariably replied. "And when it will end and what the results will be is still unclear." There was only one thing left to do: wait. And that was the worst part. To keep herself busy, Ellen started spending more and more time with her neighbors. She helped Alice in the shop. A few times they went to the city together to buy goods. Then Ellen helped unload them, arrange them, and do the paperwork. "This is completely below your level," she once told her new friend, looking at her with admiration. "You could easily handle a whole chain of supermarkets. If you worked for me, you would have been in charge of some huge department a long time ago." Alice only smiled in response. "I'm happy here," she replied. I Ellen noted this strange phrase inwardly, but decided that the time to learn the details hadn't come yet. When she wasn't helping Alice, she would visit Arthur. A few more times he took her out into nature, and Ellen was amazed every time. She had lived in this village for so many years, but Arthur, who had only recently appeared here, easily found places of such incredible beauty that it took her breath away every time. "It's just the ability of every artist," he replied modestly to Ellen's question. "Another one of your talents?" she specified, smiling. The artist only shook his head, not accepting the praise. "You are a very interesting girl," he remarked one day, looking at her intently. "When you meet strangers, You pretend to be cold. Act as if people don't interest you at all. But in reality, you are very attentive and see the good core in everyone, which perhaps the person themselves doesn't even suspect. Ellen was embarrassed. You're praising me too much. You underestimate yourself, Arthur countered. I've never had problems with self-esteem, Ellen replied. This is different. They were silent for a while, and she simply watched Arthur diligently sketch the clouds racing across the sky and wondered how he managed it if they were constantly changing position. Then suddenly, a question came to Ellen's mind. Tell me, she asked, what do you imagine your future will be like in 10 or 20 years? He suddenly sighed heavily and looked somewhere into the distance, at the horizon. That's too long a time to predict, the artist finally replied. For now, I can only say that I really like it here, and I want to stay here forever. The last word sounded a little gloomy, and Ellen even wanted to put something warm around her shoulders to ward off the goosebumps that ran across her skin. She suddenly realized that with each passing day, she was growing more and more attached to the village of her childhood and to this brother and sister. And 2 weeks later, her lawyer called. Ellen Victoria! He was practically jumping in the phone, so that it seemed the phone would burst from his excitement. This is the tone in which either very good news or very bad news is delivered. The inspection is over! No violations! He shouted. We expect you at the office tomorrow. You can return to your apartment. Ellen could only exhale sharply and sit down on the floor, feeling dizzy from the news. You're not joking, are you? She asked, just in case, not believing her ears. The lawyer was taken aback for a moment. God forbid, of course not. Sorry, it's just unexpected. Thank you for the news. She put the phone right on the floor and tried to compose herself. Of course, this was wonderful news, and it was hard to convey the joy she should be feeling right now. But for some reason, her first thought was that this meant returning to the city, to the endless cycle of work where she had no minute of peace and quiet. Meow! Ellen turned her head in surprise. It was hot, and she hadn't closed the door, only hung the old lace curtain. Taking advantage of this, the cat was now sitting in the house and looking at her as if Ellen owed him something. You're cheeky, Ellen said, smiling through her confusion. She got up, cut a thick slice of sausage, and gave it to the cat. He didn't even look at the treat and repeated insistently, Meow. All right, Your Holiness, meow, Jesty, Ellen said. I don't have anything else. Either eat this or go home and bother your owner. Meow! Ellen sighed, scooped up the striped rascal, and went to the neighbors. Arthur, she called through the window, which was open as always. I brought the cat. No one answered. Arthur? Silence. She could have left Sandro there, but for some reason, Ellen decided to go into the house. She saw Arthur immediately. He was lying on the floor unconscious. Arthur! She rushed to him, checked his pulse. Alive. She immediately called Alice. She explained the situation. I'll be there in a minute, Alice replied immediately, her voice sounding scared. Ellen started thinking about what to do. His heart was beating. He was breathing. She gently patted his cheek. Arthur tried to open his eyes. Can you hear me? Ellen asked, leaning over him. Hold on. I'll call an ambulance. No need, he whispered in a weak voice. My sister. I'm here. Alice quickly dashed into the kitchen somewhere and returned with a glass of water and a pill. She helped her brother swallow it Then she and Ellen together moved him to the sofa. After making sure he was out of danger, Alice led Ellen out onto the porch to talk. "Do you know what's wrong with him?" Ellen asked, feeling anxious. Tears appeared in the girl's eyes. "I know," she replied briefly, wiping them away. "It's hereditary. My mother had the same thing." Ellen was too agitated to find words. "No." Alice shook her head. "Well, I mean, there's a deep damage to the nervous system. There's one injection. It's expensive, and it costs so much that no foundation will help." Ellen swallowed, feeling everything inside her turn cold. She immediately made a decision. "Tell me how much," she said firmly. Alice named the sum. Ellen could only whistle in astonishment. "Exactly," Alice said, with a bitter smile. "And we constantly don't have enough money. That's why we left and came here. Arthur wants to paint while he can and live these years in peace with me." And then she couldn't hold back and cried. Ellen just silently hugged her, feeling the fragile body tremble. Her head at that moment was busy with something completely different. She spent the rest of the day on the phone. Even if she sold her apartment, car, and took all the money she had in her accounts, there was still a very large sum missing. "Where can I get it?" Ellen asked aloud, feeling despair. "Ah, grandmother," she whispered, looking at the old rug. "If only you were alive. No matter how poor we were, you always came up with something, always found money from somewhere." She suddenly remembered that when she asked where the money came from, Eleanor Constance would say, "The house spirit gave it to me, but you can't just take money from him only for a great need." Ellen fell asleep with difficulty that evening. Her thoughts jumbled in her head. Before sleep, she thought about her grandmother. And so she was almost not surprised when she opened her eyes and saw that Eleanor Constance was sitting by her bed and gently stroking her granddaughter's head. "Granny!" Ellen exclaimed in surprise, feeling like a child again. "Am I dreaming?" "Of course, my little one," her grandmother replied with a gentle smile. "Did I do something wrong?" Ellen asked, feeling guilty. "You're doing everything right, my dear," her grandmother reassured her. "Only I don't understand one thing. You started living in my house. You cleaned everything up. But why didn't you shake out the rug properly?" Ellen didn't know what to say to that, and her grandmother smiled again and slowly disappeared, dissolving into the morning light. Ellen woke up with a pounding heart, her grandmother's words firmly etched in her memory. She grabbed the heavy rug and began rolling it up. "Nonsense," she muttered aloud. "I've just gone mad." But suddenly on the floor, she saw an almost invisible square door hidden under the rug. There was no handle, so she had to struggle, inserting a thick knife into the crack. But still, the door gave way and opened, revealing a passage into something like a small cellar, probably the size of a cupboard. Ellen shone her phone flashlight and found an old metal chest at the bottom of the cellar. Not believing her eyes, she opened the lid and gasped. "Well, how is he?" Ellen asked Alice, barely crossing the threshold of their house. She hadn't been able to come for Arthur's discharge because she was held up by business in the city, but she rushed there as soon as she was free. "He's sleeping," Alice said softly, her face glowing with relief. "Sorry I would invite you in, but I'm afraid of waking him up." "Then let's go to my place," Ellen suggested. The girl nodded and they walked together to Ellen's house. When they arrived and sat down at the table, Alice said, "I haven't even properly thanked you for saving my brother's life. Thank you. I'll never forget it. Consider yourself like a sister to me now." "Perhaps this is the first truly good thing I've done in my life," Ellen replied, feeling warmth in her chest. "Don't say that," Alice objected. "You are a very good person. I know you sold your apartment, your car, and took all the money from your account, and also..." She looked at Ellen shyly, hesitant to finish. Ellen laughed. "Yes, I also found a treasure in my grandmother's house. It sounds like something incredible." "Exactly," Alice agreed. "Do you think your grandmother knew about it?" "Of course, she couldn't not know," Ellen replied. "And it seems she even hinted at something like that to me in childhood, told me fairy tales. But I either didn't understand or just didn't want to believe it. As I understand now, she herself didn't want to use it because she didn't think it belonged to her," Ellen continued, thinking aloud. "Yes," Alice nodded. "Granny believed that this money could only be taken in some special case. In fact, that's what happened." Alice smiled, looking at Ellen with admiration. "It's strange that I'm asking this," Alice said, a little embarrassed. "But do you regret that it all happened this way? I'm not talking about saving my brother's life, meeting us, learning our secret. After all, otherwise all your property, your money, and these treasures would have remained with you. And now you only have your work." Ellen smiled, feeling a lightness she hadn't felt in a long time. "I don't have work either," she replied calmly. "I submitted my resignation today." Alice's eyes widened in surprise. "What? But what about everything you told me about? Career, achievements, opportunities?" "No, I don't regret it," Ellen repeated, confident in her decision. "Yes, I will have a lot of money now, but that wouldn't make me happier. And believe me, it's strange for me to say this," Ellen continued, "but I suddenly realized that my whole life I had strived for success and wealth. But when I got all of it, I didn't become happier. And to understand this, I needed to lose that money, even if temporarily. And it was easy for me to trade all of that for Arthur's life and health," she said, looking at Alice. "Even though I know him only a little, I am sure that he is exactly the kind of person who understands what life is and knows how to appreciate it." Alice's eyes filled with tears. She quickly wiped them away. "And what about you?" she asked, looking at Ellen hopefully. "Will you stay with us?" Ellen smiled. "For now, yes. I don't even know what I'll do next, but I'm happy here for now. And I'm very glad we met," she added sincerely. "And we are glad," Alice replied. "Very." They talked for a little while longer, after which Alice went home to look after her brother. A few days later, Arthur himself was strong enough to visit his savior. "Shall we go for a walk?" he asked Ellen when he came to visit her. "Are you allowed?" she asked doubtfully, worried about his health. "If I stay lying down, I'll die," he replied with a slight smile. "I feel very well." Without speaking, they walked along the same path that went past the lake and led to the hill where Arthur had first painted Ellen. "Well, imagine that," she said, in surprise, looking around. "Not that much time has passed since we were here for the first time, but it feels like a lifetime." Arthur smiled, agreeing. Just like last time, he spread the blanket, and he and Ellen sat next to each other. "In my opinion," he replied, looking at the lake, "that's what's beautiful about life. Sometimes hundreds of years go by the same way, repeating each other. And sometimes in a few weeks, you can experience enough to last a lifetime. Ellen smiled, understanding what he meant. I remember, she said, how we sat here last time, and among other things, you asked me if I believed that everything that happened in my life happened for a reason, that it was necessary. Yes, that happened, Arthur confirmed. I was terribly angry with you then, Ellen confessed. I thought you were just an eccentric who didn't know life and imagined himself to be some kind of romantic and philosopher. Arthur laughed. But every word you said about me is the pure truth, he said. I really am like that. That's just a small part of you, Ellen replied, feeling a deep connection. You and your sister are truly amazing people. Now I'm sure that meeting you was fate. He turned his head towards her and looked at her with curiosity and tenderness. And you never cease to amaze me, Ellen. As I said, you see the good in people, even though you didn't show it at first. But I'm surprised that you're still not ready to admit that you see the good in yourself too. You know that you are smart and hardworking, that you can achieve incredible success in your career, Arthur continued. But you stubbornly refuse to admit that you are a wonderful person, worthy of love and friendship, whom it's impossible not to love. It's as if you do everything to make people think you are cold and unfeeling, he said softly. If my sister and I have helped you even a little to see yourself as you truly are, I am very happy about that. Ellen suddenly felt hot tears streaming down her face. She didn't hold them back, but only moved closer to Arthur. He put his arm around her, and she rested her head on his shoulder. No more words were needed. They just sat together, looking at the lake illuminated by the bright summer sun, and Ellen felt as if a huge burden she had carried since childhood had just fallen from her shoulders. She didn't know what she would do next. Would she and Alice remain friends? Would she have a relationship with Arthur? But she was firmly sure of only one thing. She would never lose her true self again.